Thank you, Marco, for the introduction. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me, and good afternoon to everyone. I'd like to offer my reflections about the perspective of the Western Balkans, whether they are on track for the 2030 deadline, particularly for Albania and Montenegro, which are tipped to be there. And I just will provide 5 reflections, I think. It's about the horizons. In itself, 2030 is ambitious and necessary, but it's not self-executing. We have to bear in mind that the renewed enlargement has been resulting from geopolitical factors, so it's become a geopolitical priority again due to the war in Ukraine. So there is a demand by the EU for the countries to prepare for accession, but in the case of Albania and Montenegro, it is not a deadline 2030, rather it is a political signal. So for this political signal to materialize, it requires both the accession countries to get their preparation completed, but on the other hand, for the European Union also, it has to conduct its own decision-making reforms, because particularly the unanimity decision-making on foreign affairs and on budgetary issues is an impediment in itself for the EU to accept new members without having this reform. So there is a risk that if this does not happen, this preparedness between both sides, then it will lead to a further disappointment. So asking to your question, maybe in 2030, perhaps we can, we are not sure that we can talk on optimistic notes. My second point is about Albania and Montenegro. They are on track, but when it comes to their preparedness, it's not guaranteed. The politicization of institutions, rule of law enforcement, public administration reform and professionalism, civic space protection, these are areas which the countries can backslide very easily. And because cluster 1 under which these areas are falling is the cluster which will be closed last, so there is still the risk that the countries may miss their preparedness. On the other hand, what will result as a result, we will see as a result of this process, even if it goes well, we are seeing a multi-speed Balkan, so there is a change in from a previous assumption, which all the countries, they were based, the progress accession was based on merit, but there was a package approach, based on which regional cooperation was also a strong element of it. But now we see that North Macedonia is suffering because of constitutional blockages. Serbia has stalled because of its own problems. Bosnia-Herzegovina has their plans, but they are blocked, and also Kosovo. So we are seeing a certain reality which is changing even within the region, and this fragmentation is not good. Another point, reflection that I would make is about reaching out to the European Union member state public. It has been mentioned during the day, the findings from the EU barometer about the position of the countries of the EU the publics of the EU countries that are kind of fluctuating. So there are good news and bad news in this respect. The problem will be that the countries will have to reach out the national audiences of the member states, because even if by 2027, 2028, there will be a preparedness by the countries, there will have to be a process of going through the national parliaments, and in this respect, the countries are not ready, and they have not made their point in this respect. And the last point is the enlargement light, that is considered like having the partial accession or allowing countries to have access to certain aspects like the single market or partial participation. This is good in the sense that it will be a bridge, but it will not be a waiting room again for some other period to come. So these are some of the points that I wanted to make that can also help for continuing our discussion in the panel.
Thank you. I'll now turn to Anna Maria Velinowska.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this panel discussion. At times we think that everything about enlargement and the EU accession has been said, but I see today that the topic of enlargement has been brought up multiple times throughout the panel discussions. I will try to bring up the perspective from North Macedonia and how it relates in the general regional context. North Macedonia, the country where I come from, is a very interesting and paradoxical example of EU accession process. Today, it is the most aligned and predictable partner the EU has in the Western Balkans. North Macedonia has been fully aligned with the common security and foreign and security policy of the European Union and has been a reliable NATO partner for several years now. However, the process has been politically stuck for 3 years now, mostly because of political issues and not technical issues. As it is probably known, we have to do constitutional amendments in order to move forward with the EU accession process. Although the country has received probably the most amount of positive recommendations from the Commission for starting negotiations since 2009. So, for illustration, we've been in the process for about 2 decades now. So when we talk about the EU accession and we say that lately, since the war on European soil, it has the geopolitical pressure to enlarge. It feels like the geopolitical pressure does not apply to all Western Balkan countries, because one would think that when there is a geopolitical pressure that political issues would be probably resolved faster, but in the case of North Macedonia that hasn't happened, and a resolution for a bilateral dispute has not been found. So that left the country in terms, the latest progress report has showed that there is a limited progress in the fundamentals. And we see that there is not a lot of reforms done, although we also have the growth plan. So the constant blocking of the process is now risking the country to probably limit its progress on democratic level and in terms of implementing reforms. The tone that's being set in the country regarding the EU from the government, but also from the people, has been very cynical. So because of the duration of the process, now everyone talks about the process a lot coming from the government in place from 2024, so from last year, but also from the people working in this field for many, many years, is a cynical tone that whatever we are gonna do, there will not be any progress. So to go back, whether we are gonna be on track or left behind, during today's lunch discussion, I discussed with one of the participants and he said to me, well, you need to run if you want to get on the 2030 track, which I think is pretty much...
Thank you very much. Nevenka, would you follow up on that?
I made so many points, so please remind me of the time, because I do want to reflect on the things that were said before. Since this morning, Montenegro has been mentioned several times, and I would like to paint the picture how actually this fast-paced accession, the last phase of it, is going on for Montenegro, and how actually we made it happen. not by our own achievements, but a pure political will coming from the EU representatives. So since this morning, Montenegro has been mentioned as a front runner a couple of times, and to end today's sessions for now in a more optimistic note, I would say that is correct because of definitely compelling political narrative to the EU audience, either really EU audience or EU audience on domestic turf. And it is, plastically speaking, it is a very concrete, it's not a promise of 28 for Montenegro. We've been in discussion with members of the EU, of the EU Parliament, then with the delegation of the EU in Montenegro. And what we've received, and the same situation happened 2 months before we publicly received a positive EBAR, but we received now as an information that there is a contract already drafted for Montenegro for 28. So we have the slogan and everything, 28 by the 28. So it is something that is very much on the table for Montenegro, but that's because of 2 reasons. Of course, EU doesn't have an alternative in Montenegro, that is our goal, but also EU doesn't have an alternative in terms of new candidates. So Montenegro is like, and we've received those 2 comments. We're a small country, so economically speaking, we cannot destabilize or affect on the EU way too much. And politically speaking, we can also, we cannot make such a big of a chaos in the EU. So those 2 reasons are actually propelling us to be a front runner in this entire process. There are also 2 things that Montenegro needs to do, and we've heard that from the EU representatives. So first one is the technical part, and I can tell you immediately that you don't need to know how to do it. The EU will literally show it to you. They will literally draft everything to you. One constitutional court judge from Croatia on one training told us literally, just do what they tell you.
Thank you very much. And actually, you kind of gave me the perfect starting point, because I would like to start with the point that I think that we have a bit of a gap between the EU's messaging on progress that we see in Albania and Montenegro and the actual assessment, and that includes the country report. If you look at the country report, for example, for Montenegro closely, even the Commission is very much warning that in order to fulfill its ambitious goal, Montenegro seriously needs to speed up. So even with the current pace of progress, and I'm not denying that there was some progress, 2028 is not achievable, and I think that is something that became very clear in the country report. And I see quite a few risks for that. Maybe to briefly comment also on potential deadlines, 2030 horizon, etc. I think we need to also be very careful, because there isn't a single council document that has committed to any kind of date, and I think there is a good reason for that. This is not to say, though, that for as long as I have been engaged in issues of EU integration and Balkans, I have never seen such a positive momentum for enlargement, to be honest, ever since Croatia joined. But I also think that we need to really be mindful. For example, you mentioned Foreign Minister Varadkar's statement that there are not going to be shortcuts, and then you were giving the examples, and I really think that this is exactly what I mean by the messaging that we see coming from the Commission, which is overly enthusiastic and positive. And on the one hand, I think it's a good thing because it kind of restores also a bit of a belief that it can actually happen. But I'm a bit worried, as someone who really wants to see the countries joining the European Union, that we're kind of over-promising at the moment because of what you were describing, a lack of independent institutions and slightly slower progress than we could actually believe. I want to briefly comment also on what was mentioned when it comes to EU decision-making and the internal reform. And a positive thing that I actually took from our foreign minister's visit to the region is that we have a sentence in the coalition agreement of the German government which basically says that internal EU reforms need to go hand in hand, or need to happen at the latest by the next accession. I actually think that his messaging really tells us that even the German government would be ready to consider enlargement without an internal EU reform, because we cannot really rely that it's going to happen. And I believe really, I do really believe that we need to see this independent from one another. I think trying to not have an internal EU reform as a condition for enlargement is part of the reason why we have seen some debates. Politico was writing on it about post-accession criteria. I think Commissioner Kos called it probation or membership or something. I think we need to be very careful also what that means for the region, and maybe we can discuss a bit about that later on. I think that you are very right when it comes to an internal debate in member states of the European Union. I can only speak for Germany, but in Germany, in the public debate, enlargement is not an issue. It's simply, it's not discussed. It's also not seen negatively, but it's not an issue that the German public concerns itself with. And if we see media reporting on the region, it's on the situation in Serbia, it's now for the 30th anniversary of the Dayton Agreement, but it always has kind of a skeptical undertone to it. So I agree, I think we really urgently need to also start a debate within EU member states.